In this episode of True Crimes Unfold, we unravel the harrowing case details of Chonlada Muthuwong, also known as Noon, who suffered fatal abuse at the hands of her husband, Sirichai Rakthong, Game, breaking down the events leading to her murder, the shocking revelations captured on CCTV, and the societal implications of domestic violence. Please note that events and scenarios in this video may be graphic for some viewers. Discretion is advised. Details of the videos are taken from actual case files. Before we begin, let us know in the comments where you're listening from and what type of cases you'd like us to cover next, and we'll make sure to add them to our list. Don't forget to subscribe to get new stories as soon as they're released. Now settle in, get ready, and let's begin. Nonthaburi, a peaceful suburb of Bangkok, is often described as a place where tradition and modernity coexist seamlessly. Known for its vibrant floating markets and serene riverside temples, it's a destination that promises calm and safety to its residents. But in November 2023, this picturesque town became the backdrop for a crime so heinous that it shocked the entire nation. The tragic murder of Chonlada Muthuwong, lovingly known as Noon, unraveled a dark story of domestic violence, betrayal, and unchecked rage. Noon's life was stolen in the most brutal way, exposing not just the monster behind the crime, but also the silent struggles faced by victims of abuse. The idyllic streets of Nonthaburi would never feel the same again. It began as an ordinary evening for the local police. A distress call led officers to a vacant lot on the outskirts of Nonthaburi. A passerby had stumbled upon a body wrapped in a blanket, hidden under debris. The lifeless form bore clear signs of a violent end. Bruises, cuts, and the unmistakable markings of a struggle for survival. The victim's identity was confirmed hours later as 29-year-old Chonlada Muthuwong. The news devastated her family and friends, who described her as a loving daughter, a loyal friend, and a determined young woman. But as the investigation unfolded, the truth of what had happened to Noon revealed a nightmare far worse than anyone could have imagined. Noon was a woman of quiet strength and resilience. Born and raised in a modest family, she had always been known for her warm smile and unwavering determination. Friends recalled her as someone who could brighten a room with her presence. Someone who faced life's challenges with grace and courage. She met Sirichai Rakthong, known as Game, when she was 25. Their relationship seemed like a fairy tale at first. Game, charming and ambitious, swept her off her feet. He promised her a future filled with love and stability. And Noon believed she had found her partner for life. But as the years passed, the cracks in their relationship began to show. Friends and family noticed subtle changes in Noon. She became quieter, more reserved, and less likely to share details about her personal life. Behind closed doors, Game's temper and controlling behavior began to escalate. Noon, like many victims of domestic violence, struggled to reconcile the man she had fallen in love with and the man he had become. Noon's friends later revealed that she had confided in them about Game's violent tendencies. He would often lash out during arguments, blaming her for his frustrations and insecurities. She had considered leaving him several times but hesitated, torn between hope for change and fear of the unknown. Leaving isn't as simple as people think, one of her friends shared. She was scared of him, of being alone, of not knowing where to go. And he always found a way to convince her to stay, promising that he'd do better. Noon's situation was tragically common. Studies show that victims of domestic violence often face numerous barriers to leaving abusive relationships, including financial dependency, emotional manipulation, and fear for their safety. Noon was no exception. On the day of her murder, Noon had decided to confront Game about their relationship. She had recently started making plans to leave, seeking advice from close friends and researching shelters for women in crisis. But before she could take those steps, Game discovered her intentions. What happened next was captured on CCTV, a chilling account of Noon's final moments. In the footage, she's seen entering their home, visibly tense. Game follows shortly after, his movements sharp and aggressive. Hours later, Game is seen leaving alone, carrying a large rolled-up blanket. The same blanket police would later find concealing Noon's body. For the residents of Nonthaburi, the tragedy of Noon's death served as a wake-up call. How could such a brutal act happen in their seemingly safe and peaceful community? And how many other victims of domestic violence were suffering in silence, hidden behind closed doors? The police quickly shifted their focus to finding Game, who had disappeared shortly after the discovery of Noon's body. The urgency of their investigation underscored the gravity of the case, as well as the need for greater awareness and intervention in domestic violence situations. As news of Noon's murder spread, it sparked outrage and grief across Nonthaburi and beyond. Her friends and family held a vigil in her honor, sharing stories of her kindness, her dreams, and the vibrant life she had worked so hard to build. For many, her death highlighted the critical need for systemic change. No one should have to suffer like this, a local activist said at the vigil. Noon's story is heartbreaking, but it's not unique. We need to do better. For her, for every victim of domestic violence. The seeds of change were planted that night as the community vowed to honor Noon's memory by fighting for a future where no one else would face the same fate. To understand the tragedy of Chonlada Muthuwong's death, it's essential to first understand her life. A life marked by resilience, ambition, and a desire for love and stability. Noon, as her friends affectionately called her, was a woman of quiet determination. But the relationship she hoped would bring her happiness instead became a source of pain, culminating in a betrayal that would cost her everything. Noon grew up in a modest household in Nonthaburi, a town she loved for its charm and simplicity. From a young age, she was known for her kindness and work ethic. While her family didn't have much, they instilled in her the values of perseverance and compassion. Noon's mother often recounted how, even as a child, she would go out of her way to help others, whether it was assisting her classmates with schoolwork or caring for stray animals in the neighborhood. As she grew older, Noon carried those values into her professional life. She worked tirelessly as a sales representative for a local cosmetics company, earning the respect of her colleagues and clients. Her dream was to one day start her own business, a dream she spoke of often with her closest friends. But alongside her professional aspirations, Noon also longed for companionship. Her friends described her as romantic at heart, someone who believed in the idea of a soulmate. When she met Sirchai Raktong, known as Game, she thought she had found that connection. Game was everything Noon thought she wanted in a partner: charming, confident, and ambitious. He worked as a freelance graphic designer, and his creativity and outgoing personality immediately drew her in. Their relationship blossomed quickly, with Game making grand promises of a future filled with love and stability. He swept her off her feet, one of Noon's friends recalled. She was so happy at the beginning. Game introduced Noon to his friends and family, and the two became inseparable. To outsiders, they seemed like the perfect couple. They often shared photos of their travels and cozy dinners, their smiles masking the storm brewing beneath the surface. While their relationship started off strong, the cracks began to show within the first year. Game's confidence started to reveal itself as control. He would question Noon's every move: where she went, who she saw, and how she spent her money. What began as seemingly innocent concern escalated into possessive behavior. Game's temper also became more apparent, often flaring up during minor disagreements. Noon, ever the optimist, believed that things would get better. She confided in a close friend, admitting that Game's behavior worried her, but insisting that he was just stressed and that his outbursts weren't who he really was. Like many victims of domestic violence, Noon struggled to reconcile the man she fell in love with and the man he had become. Over time, Game's behavior turned violent. He would lash out verbally, calling Noon names and blaming her for his frustrations. On several occasions, arguments escalated to physical abuse. Noon hid the bruises from her friends and family, afraid of what they might say or do. When she did confide in a few close friends, they urged her to leave. But for Noon, it wasn't that simple. He always apologized afterward, one friend recalled. He'd cry and promise to change, and she wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe the man she fell in love with was still in there somewhere. Noon also faced the financial and emotional hurdles that often trap victims in abusive relationships. She and Game shared expenses, and she worried about what leaving would mean for her stability. More than that, she feared what he might do if she tried to leave. The cycle of abuse tightened its grip, leaving Noon feeling trapped. In the months leading up to her death, Noon began taking small but significant steps to reclaim her independence. She started saving money in a secret account, confiding in her closest friend about her plans to leave. She also researched shelters and legal resources for women in crisis, trying to prepare herself for the inevitable confrontation with Game. She was scared, but she was determined, her friend said. She wanted to get out. She wanted a better life for herself. However, leaving an abusive relationship is often the most dangerous time for victims. Abusers, feeling their control slipping away, can become more volatile and desperate. Noon was acutely aware of this risk, and she tried to keep her plans as discreet as possible. But somehow, Game found out. On the day of her murder, Noon returned home from work, visibly tense. CCTV footage shows her entering their shared apartment while texting on her phone, likely updating her friend about her plans. Game followed shortly after, his demeanor noticeably agitated. Witnesses later reported hearing raised voices and sounds of a struggle coming from their unit. What happened next remains partially a mystery, but the aftermath was chillingly clear. CCTV footage captured Game leaving the apartment hours later, carrying a large rolled-up blanket. Inside that blanket was Noon's lifeless body. Forensic evidence would later reveal the extent of Game's violence. Noon had suffered multiple injuries, indicating a prolonged and brutal attack. Her final moments were a testament to her strength and resilience as she fought valiantly for her life. For those who knew Noon and Game, the revelation of what had happened behind closed doors was both shocking and heartbreaking. How could a man who once seemed so devoted turn into a monster? And how had Noon, a woman of such strength and determination, become ensnared in such a toxic relationship? Experts on domestic violence explain that these relationships are often marked by stark contrasts. The highs of affection and promises, followed by the lows of control and violence. The cycle can leave victims feeling confused, isolated, and unable to break free. Noon's story, while tragic, is not uncommon. It reflects the struggles faced by countless victims around the world. Noon's death sent shockwaves through her community. For her friends and family, it was a devastating reminder of the dangers of unchecked abuse. She deserved so much better, her mother said in a tearful statement. She was kind, hardworking, and full of life, and he took all of that away. As the investigation continued, Noon's story became a rallying cry for change. Advocacy groups began organizing workshops and campaigns to raise awareness about domestic violence, ensuring that her loss would not be in vain. Noon's life, though tragically cut short, remains a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Her story highlights the importance of recognizing the signs of abuse, supporting victims, and fostering a society where no one has to endure the pain she faced. The murder of Chonlada Muthuwong marked the horrifying culmination of a cycle of abuse and control that had plagued her relationship with Sirichai Game Rakthong. But as details of the crime came to light, it was the meticulous investigation that pieced together the events of that fateful day, unraveling the sinister truth behind Noon's death. Noon's body was discovered in a vacant lot on the outskirts of Nonthaburi, wrapped in a blanket and hidden under debris. The grisly discovery, made by a passerby, immediately raised alarms. Police arriving at the scene noted the clear signs of violence: bruises, lacerations, and defensive wounds indicating that Noon had fought desperately for her life. Forensic evidence suggested that she had been killed elsewhere and her body transported to the lot. The presence of fibers and soil, not native to the dump site, supported this theory, shifting the investigation's focus to her home. Back at the apartment, Noon shared with Game, investigators found chilling evidence of the crime. The living room bore signs of a violent struggle: overturned furniture, blood spatter, and signs of an attempt to clean up the scene. A roll of tape matching the one used on the blanket containing Noon's body was discovered in a drawer, further implicating the residence as the primary crime scene. Nonthaburi's surveillance infrastructure played a pivotal role in unraveling the case. CCTV cameras around the apartment complex captured key moments leading up to and after Noon's murder. The footage showed Noon entering the building on the evening of her death, her demeanor visibly tense. Moments later, Game was seen following her, his face set in a grim expression. Hours later, Game was recorded leaving the building alone, carrying a large, rolled-up blanket. The image, eerily clear, became a cornerstone of the investigation. Additional footage from nearby streets showed him driving a borrowed vehicle toward the lot where Noon's body was later found. The CCTV footage not only confirmed Game's involvement, but also provided a timeline that allowed investigators to piece together the sequence of events. By the time Noon's body was discovered, Game had disappeared. The urgency to locate him escalated as police issued an arrest warrant and began tracking his movements. Investigators traced his phone activity and bank transactions, revealing that he had withdrawn a significant amount of cash before going off the grid. Witnesses reported seeing Game boarding a bus bound for a remote province, where he was believed to be seeking refuge with relatives. Police followed this lead, launching a nationwide manhunt and distributing his photo to the public. The media coverage of the case ensured that his face became widely recognized, making it increasingly difficult for him to remain in hiding. As investigators delved into Game's background, a clearer picture of his motives began to emerge. Financial records revealed mounting debts from failed business ventures and a gambling addiction that had spiraled out of control. Game's financial instability had been a point of contention in his relationship with Noon, who had shouldered much of their household expenses in recent months. Interviews with Noon's friends further illuminated the toxic dynamic between the couple. Game's jealousy and controlling behavior had escalated in the weeks leading up to the murder, as Noon began making plans to leave him. Friends reported that she had expressed fears about how he might react if he discovered her intentions. The financial strain, coupled with Game's fear of losing control over Noon, painted a chilling picture of a man driven by desperation and rage. Game was eventually apprehended in a rural village after a tip-off from a local resident. He surrendered without resistance, his demeanor subdued but cooperative. In police custody, Game initially denied any involvement in Noon's death, claiming that they had argued but she had left the apartment alive. However, confronted with the overwhelming evidence, including the CCTV footage, forensic findings, and the items recovered from the apartment, Game's story began to unravel. Under intense questioning, he broke down and confessed to the murder. According to his account, the argument that night had escalated when Noon confronted him about his behavior and expressed her intent to leave. Fueled by a toxic mix of anger, fear, and humiliation, Game attacked her. He described the violence in chilling detail, admitting that he had lost control in the heat of the moment. After realizing what he had done, Game said he panicked and attempted to cover up the crime. He wrapped Noon's body in a blanket, cleaned up the apartment as best as he could, and transported her to the vacant lot under the cover of night. His actions, he claimed, were driven by fear of being caught, though his confession did little to garner sympathy. The forensic evidence further corroborated Game's confession. Bloodstains in the apartment matched Noon's DNA, and the tape used on the blanket was identical to a roll found in their home. The autopsy revealed multiple injuries, including blunt force trauma and stab wounds, indicating a prolonged and violent struggle. Investigators also discovered text messages on Noon's phone that she had sent to a friend just hours before her death. In them, she expressed fear about confronting Game and her determination to leave the relationship. These messages became a poignant reminder of Noon's courage and the tragic consequences of her attempts to reclaim her life. Noon's murder was not an isolated incident. It highlighted the pervasive issue of domestic violence in society and the barriers victims face in seeking help. Advocacy groups quickly mobilized, using her story to raise awareness and demand systemic change. One advocate emphasized the importance of community intervention, saying, "Noon's death is a stark reminder that domestic violence thrives in silence. We need to create environments where victims feel safe to speak out and where abusers are held accountable before it's too late." The case also prompted calls for better resources for domestic violence victims, including access to emergency shelters, legal support, and counseling services. Noon's story became a rallying cry for change, inspiring efforts to ensure that her death would not be in vain. As the investigation concluded and the case moved toward trial, Noon's friends, family, and community continued to grapple with the loss. Vigils were held in her honor, with attendees sharing memories of her kindness, strength, and determination. Her life, though tragically cut short, became a symbol of resilience and a catalyst for action. For Nontaburi, the tragedy of Noon's death shattered the illusion of safety in their peaceful town. But it also brought people together, uniting them in their grief and their resolve to address the issues that had allowed such a tragedy to occur. The investigation had brought justice closer for Noon, but the lessons her story offered were far from over. Her death was a stark reminder of the urgent need to confront domestic violence and to protect those who are most vulnerable. As the community awaited the trial, they vowed to honor Noon's memory by ensuring that her story would inspire change. The apprehension of Sirichai Game, Rakthong, was just the beginning of the legal journey to seek justice for Chonlada Muthuwong. What followed was a harrowing confession that detailed the horrifying last moments of Noon's life, coupled with a trial that gripped the nation. The proceedings offered a grim reminder of the consequences of unchecked rage and domestic violence, as well as the importance of accountability. In police custody, Game initially tried to maintain his innocence, insisting that Noon had left their apartment alive after an argument. However, the mountain of evidence against him left little room for denial. Confronted with the damning CCTV footage, forensic findings, and witness testimonies, Game finally broke down and confessed to the crime. His confession painted a grim picture of the events leading up to Noon's death. According to Game, the argument began when Noon confronted him about his controlling behavior and financial irresponsibility. She told him she planned to leave, a declaration that sent him into a fit of rage. "I couldn't control myself," Game admitted during questioning. "She said she didn't love me anymore, that she was done with me." The argument escalated quickly. Game admitted to attacking Noon in the heat of the moment, striking her multiple times before grabbing a kitchen knife. The forensic evidence confirmed that Noon had suffered a combination of blunt force trauma and stab wounds, consistent with his account. Her injuries indicated a prolonged struggle, highlighting her bravery in the face of overwhelming violence. After the attack, Game panicked. He spent hours cleaning the apartment, wrapping Noon's body in a blanket, and disposing of her remains in a vacant lot. The premeditated nature of these actions, using a borrowed vehicle, selecting a remote location, and attempting to sanitize the scene, contradicted his claims of acting impulsively. Game's confession, coupled with the shocking details of the crime, sparked nationwide outrage. Media outlets provided extensive coverage, with headlines condemning Game's actions and calling for justice for Noon. Advocacy groups seized the moment to highlight the dangers of domestic violence, emphasizing the need for systemic reforms to protect victims and hold perpetrators accountable. Public opinion was overwhelmingly against Game. While his confession brought clarity to the case, it did little to garner sympathy. Many viewed his actions as calculated and irredeemable, particularly given the cruelty of Noon's death and his attempts to cover up the crime. Game's trial began months after his arrest, drawing intense public and media attention. He faced charges of premeditated murder, tampering with evidence, and obstruction of justice. The prosecution sought the maximum penalty, arguing that his actions were deliberate and rooted in a pattern of control and abuse. The courtroom was filled with emotion as Noon's family and friends attended each session, determined to see justice served. Photographs of Noon, smiling and full of life, adorned the courtroom, a stark contrast to the brutality of her final moments. Her mother, speaking outside the courthouse, described the pain of losing her daughter. "She was everything to us," she said tearfully. "We just want her to be remembered for the beautiful person she was, not for what he did to her." The prosecution built a meticulous case against Game, presenting a timeline of events that left little room for doubt. Their evidence included CCTV footage. The recordings showing Game leaving the apartment with the rolled-up blanket were central to the prosecution's case. The footage provided a clear visual link between Game and the disposal of Noon's body. Forensic evidence. Bloodstains in the apartment, matching tape from the blanket, and the injuries documented in Noon's autopsy all corroborated the prosecution's narrative. Game's confession. Although the defense tried to argue that the confession was coerced, it aligned with the physical evidence and witness accounts, making it a powerful piece of the prosecution's argument. Witness testimonies. Friends and neighbors testified about the toxic nature of Game and Noon's relationship, describing his controlling behavior and the fear Noon had expressed in the weeks leading up to her death. The prosecution emphasized the premeditated nature of Game's actions. They argued that his attempts to clean the crime scene and dispose of Noon's body showed a calculated effort to evade responsibility, not the impulsive actions of a man consumed by temporary rage. Game's defense team faced an uphill battle. Their strategy focused on portraying him as a man driven to desperation by financial stress and emotional instability. They argued that the murder was not premeditated, but rather the result of a heated argument that spiraled out of control. Game's lawyers also tried to shift some of the blame onto external factors, including his struggles with gambling addiction and the pressure of financial debt. They presented character witnesses who described Game as a generally good-natured individual who had made poor choices but wasn't inherently violent. Game himself took the stand, expressing remorse for his actions. "I didn't mean to hurt her," he said, his voice shaking. I loved her, and I don't know what came over me. I just couldn't handle losing her. However, his testimony did little to sway the jury. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and his attempts to frame the murder as an impulsive act failed to account for the deliberate steps he had taken after Noon's death. After weeks of testimony, the jury reached a unanimous verdict. Guilty on all counts. Game was convicted of premeditated murder, tampering with evidence, and obstruction of justice. The judge, in delivering the sentence, condemned Game's actions as a heinous betrayal of trust and humanity. Game was sentenced to life imprisonment, a decision that brought some measure of closure to Noon's family and friends. While they acknowledged that no sentence could bring her back, they expressed relief that her killer would be held accountable. "This is justice for Noon," her mother said outside the courthouse. "But it doesn't erase the pain. We'll carry this loss forever." The trial's conclusion marked a turning point in the conversation around domestic violence in Thailand. Advocacy groups used the case as a platform to push for greater awareness and stronger protections for victims. Public officials pledged to allocate more resources to shelters, legal aid, and education programs aimed at preventing abuse. Noon's story also inspired grassroots movements focused on empowering women and creating safe spaces for victims to seek help. Her friends launched a campaign in her memory, using her name to promote awareness about the warning signs of abuse and the resources available to those in need. For Nonthaburi, the trial was both a reckoning and a call to action. Residents who had once viewed their town as a haven of safety were forced to confront the hidden dangers of domestic violence and the importance of community vigilance. Local leaders organized town hall meetings to discuss the lessons learned from Noon's case and how to prevent similar tragedies in the future. These gatherings became a space for healing, reflection, and the collective determination to honor Noon's memory by fostering a safer, more supportive community. While the trial brought justice for Noon, her story resonated far beyond the courtroom. She became a symbol of resilience and a reminder of the urgent need to address domestic violence at every level of society. Her family and friends, though devastated by her loss, channeled their grief into action, ensuring that her life would be remembered for its beauty and impact, not just its tragic end. Noon's legacy lives on as a beacon of hope for victims of abuse and a testament to the strength of a community united in the pursuit of justice and change. The conclusion of Sirichai Game, Rakthong's trial, brought a sense of justice for Chonlada, Noon Muthuwong's family and friends, but it also left behind critical questions about the societal and systemic failures that allowed her tragic death to occur. Beyond the courtroom, her case became a rallying point for discussions about domestic violence, safety, and the cultural norms that often keep victims silent. Noon's murder was a stark reminder of the pervasive issue of domestic violence in Thailand and around the world. Advocacy groups used the widespread media attention on the case to highlight alarming statistics. According to reports, nearly 1 in 3 women globally experience some form of domestic violence during their lifetime. Yet many cases go unreported due to fear, stigma, or lack of resources. Noon's friends revealed that she had spoken about Game's controlling behavior and occasional violence, but had hesitated to leave him permanently. This hesitation, they explained, stemmed from fear. Fear of retribution, fear of judgment, and fear of the unknown. She thought she could fix things. One friend shared. She didn't want to give up on him, even though it was costing her everything. Noon's story resonated with many women who recognized the same patterns in their own relationships. Her death became a tragic but powerful catalyst for encouraging victims to seek help and for communities to address the root causes of abuse. The case also shed light on the systemic barriers that keep victims trapped in abusive relationships. For Noon, these barriers included financial dependence. Although Noon worked and had a steady income, her financial entanglement with game made it difficult for her to leave without facing economic instability. Cultural expectations. In many communities, societal norms pressure women to prioritize family harmony and avoid bringing shame to their relationships, even at the expense of their well-being. Lack of accessible resources. Noon had begun researching shelters and legal options in the months leading up to her death. But the limited availability of these resources made her escape plans challenging. These barriers are not unique to Noon's case. Advocates argue that addressing these systemic issues is essential to preventing similar tragedies. We need to create environments where victims feel supported, not judged, said a representative from a local women's rights organization. No one should feel like they have to stay in a dangerous situation because they have no other options. In the wake of Noon's murder, her community rallied to honor her memory and ensure that her death would not be in vain. Advocacy groups, local leaders, and residents came together to address domestic violence through education, policy changes, and support programs. Key initiatives included workshops and seminars. Local organizations began hosting events to educate the public about recognizing the signs of abuse, understanding the cycle of violence, and accessing resources. Improved reporting mechanisms. Police and social services implemented streamlined procedures for reporting domestic violence, ensuring that victims could receive help quickly and discreetly. Expanded shelter programs. Donations poured in to fund safe houses and emergency shelters, providing victims with temporary housing, counseling, and legal assistance. Noon's friends also launched a campaign called Noon's Light, aimed at raising awareness about domestic violence and providing resources for victims. The campaign's social media presence garnered widespread support, with thousands sharing messages of solidarity and pledging to stand against abuse. Noon's case highlighted both the strengths and shortcomings of law enforcement's role in addressing domestic violence. While police worked tirelessly to apprehend game and bring him to justice, advocates pointed out that earlier intervention could have saved Noon's life. Critics noted that domestic violence cases are often dismissed as private matters, leading to a lack of accountability for abusers. Advocacy groups called for mandatory training for law enforcement officers to better handle domestic violence reports and to recognize the patterns that often precede lethal violence. Noon's case was preventable, one advocate argued, if her cries for help had been taken more seriously, if there had been better resources for her to turn to, we might be telling a different story today. The media played a significant role in amplifying Noon's story, but not all coverage was equal. While some outlets focused on the sensational details of her murder, others used the platform to highlight the broader issues of domestic violence and systemic failure. Documentaries and in-depth reports delved into Noon's life, portraying her not just as a victim, but as a vibrant, ambitious woman whose potential was stolen by violence. These stories emphasized her humanity, reminding viewers of the real cost of domestic violence. Noon's story isn't just about her death, said a journalist who covered the trial. It's about the life she lived, the obstacles she faced, and the changes we need to make so that no one else suffers the way she did. Noon's murder prompted policymakers to consider legislative reforms aimed at better protecting victims of domestic violence. Proposals included stronger restraining order laws, making it easier for victims to obtain and enforce restraining orders against their abusers, increased funding for support services, allocating more resources to shelters, counseling programs, and legal aid for victims, public awareness campaigns, launching nationwide initiatives to challenge cultural norms that perpetuate domestic violence, and to encourage bystanders to intervene. These efforts, while promising, faced challenges in implementation. Advocates stressed the importance of sustained public pressure to ensure that these reforms were more than just temporary responses to a high-profile case. For Noon's friends and family, the focus remained on preserving her memory and using her story to drive change. They established the Chonlada Foundation, which provides scholarships for women pursuing education in social work and law, as well as funding for domestic violence prevention programs. At the foundation's launch event, Noon's sister spoke about the importance of continuing her fight. Noon didn't just want to survive. She wanted to thrive. She believed in a better future, and we owe it to her to build that future for others. Noon's murder was a devastating reminder of the dangers of domestic violence and the critical need for systemic change. Her story taught the following lessons: the importance of awareness, recognizing the signs of abuse, and intervening early can save lives. The role of community. Friends, neighbors, and colleagues play a crucial role in supporting victims and breaking the cycle of violence. The need for accountability. Abusers must be held accountable, and law enforcement must treat domestic violence cases with the seriousness they deserve. Though her life was cut short, Noon's legacy continues to inspire change. Her story has sparked conversations, mobilized communities, and brought attention to the silent epidemic of domestic violence. For her loved ones, the pain of her loss remains, but so does the hope that her death will lead to a safer, more compassionate world. Her light may be gone, her mother said at a memorial event, but her love and courage will guide us as we fight for others who are still in the darkness. Noon's death was a tragedy, but her story has become a testament to the strength of the human spirit and the power of collective action. Through her memory, she continues to inspire a movement for justice, safety, and change. The murder of Chonlada Muthuwong left an indelible mark on her family, friends, and community. As the trial concluded and her killer, Sirichai Game Rakthong, was sentenced to life in prison, the focus shifted to healing and ensuring that her story would lead to meaningful change. Noon's legacy became a powerful catalyst for reflection, advocacy, and collective action against domestic violence. The aftermath of Noon's death brought a wave of grief that united the people of Nonthaburi and beyond. Candlelight vigils were held in her honor, with hundreds gathering to pay their respects and share memories of the vibrant, kind-hearted woman who had been taken too soon. At one such vigil, a close friend spoke through tears about Noon's unwavering kindness and strength. She always put others first, even when she was struggling. Now it's our turn to put her first, to honor her life by making sure no one else has to go through what she did. Noon's story resonated deeply with many who saw reflections of their own lives in her struggles. Survivors of domestic violence shared their experiences, finding strength in her memory and using their voices to break the silence surrounding abuse. For many, Noon became a symbol of resilience and a call to action. Noon's death served as a wake-up call, highlighting the urgent need for greater awareness and resources to combat domestic violence. Advocacy groups, local leaders, and national organizations launched initiatives inspired by her story, focusing on education, prevention, and support. Public education campaigns, billboards, social media posts, and public service announcements emphasized the warning signs of abuse and encouraged bystanders to take action. These campaigns featured messages like "Break the silence" and "No more hiding," accompanied by information about helplines and shelters. Workshops and training. Community centers began hosting workshops for residents to learn how to recognize and intervene in abusive situations. Law enforcement agencies also implemented training programs to improve their response to domestic violence cases. School programs. Educational programs were introduced in schools to teach young people about healthy relationships, consent, and the importance of mutual respect. These initiatives aim to address the root causes of domestic violence by fostering empathy and understanding from an early age. In the months following Noon's death, her family established the Chonlada Foundation to continue her legacy. The foundation's mission was threefold: support for victims, providing funding for shelters, counseling services, and legal aid to help victims of domestic violence escape dangerous situations. Educational scholarships, offering scholarships to women pursuing studies in law, social work, and other fields related to advocacy and justice. Community outreach, organizing events and campaigns to raise awareness about domestic violence and promote systemic change. At the Foundation's launch event, Noon's sister spoke about the importance of turning pain into purpose. Noon believed in helping others, even when it was hard. Through this foundation, we're keeping her spirit alive and ensuring that her story makes a difference. Noon's story also prompted a broader societal reckoning with the cultural and systemic factors that enable domestic violence. Advocates highlighted the following key issues. Cultural norms. In many communities, traditional gender roles and expectations pressure women to prioritize family harmony over personal safety. This stigma often discourages victims from seeking help. Economic dependence. Financial barriers prevent many victims from leaving abusive relationships, emphasizing the need for economic empowerment programs and resources. Legal gaps. Inconsistent enforcement of protective orders and limited access to legal aid leave victims vulnerable, calling for comprehensive legal reforms. These reflections fueled ongoing debates about how to create a society where domestic violence is not just addressed, but prevented. For Noon's family and friends, the journey of healing was long and complex. While the trial's conclusion brought a sense of closure, the void left by her absence was impossible to fill. Her mother, who had been a pillar of strength throughout the proceedings, spoke candidly about the duality of grief and hope. "We've lost so much, but we've also gained a community that loved her and now fights for her. That gives us strength." Noon's friends channeled their grief into activism, volunteering with local shelters and sharing her story at public events. They described their work as both a tribute to her memory and a way to prevent similar tragedies. Noon's story reached far beyond Nonthaburi, resonating with audiences around the world. International organizations cited her case as an example of the universal nature of domestic violence and the urgent need for global action. Her legacy became part of a larger movement, inspiring collaborations across borders to share resources, strategies, and support systems. Her story also became a focal point for filmmakers, authors, and artists seeking to raise awareness through creative mediums. Documentaries and books chronicled her life, exploring the systemic failures that contributed to her death and the lessons her story offered. Noon's life and death taught profound lessons about resilience, love, and the fight against injustice. Among the most important takeaways were the importance of support. Systems, friends, family, and community members play a critical role in helping victims escape abusive relationships and rebuild their lives. The need for vigilance. Recognizing the signs of abuse and taking action can save lives. Silence and inaction often perpetuate cycles of violence. The power of advocacy. Grassroots efforts and systemic reforms must go hand in hand to address the root causes of domestic violence and create lasting change. Though her life was tragically cut short, Noon's legacy continues to inspire action and bring hope to those still struggling. Her story serves as a reminder that even in the face of unimaginable loss, there is the potential for resilience, growth, and transformation. "Noon's light shines on," her mother said at a memorial service. "Through the work we do in her name, we are building a world where no one has to suffer like she did." That's how we honor her. That's how we keep her with us. As her community moves forward, they carry with them the lessons and love that Noon shared during her life. Her memory fuels a movement for justice and compassion, proving that even in the darkest moments, there is always the possibility of light.